Section 2 of the Endeavour Journal of Sir Joseph Banks, Journal from 25 August 1768 to 12 July 1771, by Joseph Banks. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Gail Timmerman Vaughan. Section 2, September 1768. 1768, September 1, coast of Spain. Still blue. Mother Carey's chickens had not yet left us, but towards night wind slackened, so that we were again tolerably easy. By our reckoning, we must make some part of the coast of Spain before morning. 1768, September 2. This morning about 7 saw the coast of Galicia, between Cape Ortegal and Finisterre. Weather tolerably fine, so that we could use the casting net, which brought up 2 kinds of animals different from any taken before. They came up in clusters, both sorts indifferently in each cluster, though much fewer of the horned ones than of the others. They seem to be 2 species of one genus, but are not at all reducible to any genus hitherto described. 1768, September 3. Blew fresh this morn. We were employed all day in describing the animals taken yesterday. Found them to be of a new genus, and of the same with that taken on 28 August, called the genus Dagassa, from the likeness of one species to a gem. Towards even, wind fair settled, tolerably fine. 1768, September 4. Calm today. We were employed in fishing with the casting net, and were fortunate in taking several specimens of Dagassa saccata, adhering together, sometimes to the length of a yard or more, and shining in the water with very beautiful colours. But another insect which we took today was possessed of more beautiful colouring than anything in nature I have ever seen, hardly excepting gems. He is of a new genus and called blank, of which we took another species, who had no beauty to boast, but this which we called opalinum shone in the water with all the splendour and variety of colours that we observe in a real opal. He lived in the glass of salt water, in which he was put for examination several hours, darting about with great agility, and at every motion showing an almost infinite variety of changeable colours. Towards the evening of this day a new phenomenon appeared. The sea was almost covered with a small species of crabs, Cancer depurator of Linnaeus, floating upon the surface of the water, and moving themselves with tolerable agility, as if the surface of the water and not the bottom was their proper station. Here again, as usual, our casting net was of great service. We took with it as many as were wanted, and went to bed well contented with the produce of the day. 1768, September 5. I forgot to mention yesterday the 2 birds were caught in the rigging, who probably had come from Spain, as we were not then distant above 5 or 6 leagues. This morning another was caught and brought to me, but so weak that it died in my hand almost immediately. They were all 3 of the same species, and not described by Linnaeus. We called them Motacea felificans, as they must be sailors who would venture themselves aboard a ship which is going round the world. But to make some balance to our good fortune, now become too prevalent, a misfortune happened this morn, equalling almost the worst which our enemies could have wished. The morning was calm, and Richmond employed in searching for what should appear on the surface of the water. A shoal of Dagasses were observed, and he, eager to take some of them, threw the cast net fastened to nothing but his wrist. The strip slipped from him, and the net at once sunk into the profound, never more to torment its inhabitants, but leaving us for some time entirely without a resource. Plenty of animals coming past the ship, and no nets but in the hold, stowed under so many things that it was impossible even to hope for their being got out today at least. However, an old hoop net was fastened to a fishing rod, and with it one new species of Dagassa was caught and called lobata. 1768, September 6. Fine and calm this morn. Immense numbers of Dagassa lobata floated by, and were taken by our new contrivance. Some of them in clusters, as many as 14 together, united by a lobe on the underside. Towards the middle of the day, the sea was almost covered with Dagasses of different kinds, among which 2 entirely new ones were taken, rostrata and strumosa. But neither of these were observed hanging in clusters, as most of the other species had been. Indeed, whether from the badness of the new machine or their scarcity, I cannot say. Only 1 of rostrata and 2 of strumosa were taken. It is now time to give some account of the genus Dagassa, of which there are already 6 species taken, all agreeing in many particulars vastly well, but chiefly in this very singular one, that they have a hole at each end, which holes communicate by a tube, often as large as the body of the animal, by the help of which they swim with some degree of activity when separated from each other, for several sorts are seen most generally joined together, gemma more particularly, which adhere in clusters of some hundreds irregularly shaped. In the midst of these were generally found a few specimens of cornuta, from which circumstance we may judge that they are very nearly allied. It seems singular that no naturalist before this time should have taken notice of these animals, as they abound so much where the ship now is, not 20 leagues from the coast of Spain. From hence, however, great hopes may be formed that the inhabitants of the deep have been but little examined, and, as Dr. Solander and myself shall have probably greater opportunity in the course of this voyage than anyone has had before us, it is a very encouraging circumstance to hope that so large a field of natural history has remained almost untrod, even till this time, and that we may be able from this circumstance alone, almost unthought of, when we embarked in the undertaking, to add considerable light to the science which we so eagerly pursue. This evening a large quantity of the Carcinium opalinum, which may be called opal insect, came under the ship's stern, making the very sea appear with uncommon beauty, their colours appearing with vast brightness, even at the depth of 2 or 3 fathoms, though they are not more than 3 lines long and 1 broad. 1768, September 7. On examining the degisas, which were taken yesterday, several small animals were found lodged in the hollow parts of their bodies, and some in the very substance of the flesh, which seems to be their food, as many of the degisas were full of scars, which had undoubtedly been the lodgment of these animals some time before. Upon a minute inspection, they proved to be animals not to be classed under any of Linnaeus's genera, though nearly related to Oniscus, from which circumstance the name Onidium was given to the new genus, and to them was added an animal taken the 28th of August, and mentioned in the 2nd page by the name of Oniscus macrothalmus. In one circumstance these insects differ from any hitherto described, and in that they all 3 agree, viz. The having 2 eyes joined together under one common membrane, without the least distinction or division between them, which circumstance alone seems a sufficient reason for constituting a new genus. The wind was now fair, and we went very pleasantly on towards our destined port, though rather too fast for any natural inquiries. For my own part, I could well dispense with a much slower pace, but I fancy few in the ship, Dr. Solander excepted, are of the same opinion, though I believe everybody envied our easy contented circumstances during the last calm, which brought so much food to our pursuits. 1768, September 8. Blew fresh today, but the wind was very fair, so nobody complained. Nor would they, was the wind much stronger, so impatient has the calms and foul wind made everybody. By the reckoning, we were off Cape St. Vincent, so shall soon bid adieu to Europe for some time. 1768, September 10. Since the northerly wind began to blow, it has not varied a point. The sea is now down, and we go pleasantly on, at the rate of about 6 knots. Could any contrivance be found by the help of which new subjects of natural history could be taken, Dr. Solander and myself would be quite happy. We are forced to be content. 3 days are now past since anything has been taken or indeed seen, except a stray turtle who swam by the ship about noon, but was left far behind before any instrument by which he might have been taken could possibly have been got to hand. Today, for the first time, we dined in Africa, and took our leave of Europe for heaven alone knows how long, perhaps forever. That thought demands a sigh as a tribute due to the memory of friends left behind, and they have it. But 2 cannot be spared. 2-fold give more pain to the sire than pleasure to those sighed for. 'Tis enough that they are remembered. They would not wish to be too much thought of by one so long to be separated from them, and left alone to the mercy of winds and waves. 1768, September 11. Wind fair, but rather slackened upon us. Nothing, however, was observed. We expected to make Porto Santo tonight, but did not. 1768, September 12. Arrived Madeira. This morning, Porto Santo and Madeira were in full view. They were seen at daybreak, indeed, we had a little overshot them. As the wind was rather scanty, we had, however, no doubt of fetching in at night. Accordingly, at 10 to night, came to an anchor in Funchiale Bay. This morn about 11, the product boat, as it is called by English sailors, which is the boat from the officers of health, who must give leave before any ship's crew can land, came on board, and we immediately went on shore in the town of Funchiale, the capital of the island, situate in latitude 3240 north, called so from the fennel, which grows in plenty upon the rocks in its neighbourhood, and which is called funco in the Portuguese language. Here we immediately went to the house of the English consul, Mr. Cheap, one of the first merchants in the place, where we were received with uncommon marks of civility. He insisted upon our taking possession of his house, and living entirely with him during our stay, which we did, and were by him furnished with every accommodation that we could wish. Leave was procured by him for us to search the island for whatever natural productions we might find worth taking notice of. People were also employed to procure for us fish and shells, which we could not have spared time to have collected ourselves. Horses and guides were also got for Dr. Solander and myself, to carry us to any part of the island which we might choose to visit. But our very short stay, which was only 5 days inclusive, made it impossible to go any distance, so we contented ourselves with collecting as much as we could in the neighbourhood of the town, never going above 3 miles from it during our whole stay. The season of the year was undoubtedly the worst for both plants and insects, being the height of the vintage, when nothing is green in the country but just on the verge of small brooks, by which these vines are watered. We made shift, however, to collect specimens of several plants, etc., of which a catalogue follows, as it is not worth while to mix them in the journal, where they would take up much room. The 5 days which we remained upon the island were spent so exactly in the same manner that it is by no means necessary to divide them. I shall therefore only say that in general we got up in the morn, went out on our researches, returned to dine, and went out again in the evening. One day, however, we had a visit from the governor, of which we had notice before, and were obliged to stay at home, so that unsought honour lost us very near the whole day, a very material part of the short time we were allowed to stay upon the island. We, however, contrived to revenge ourselves upon his excellency by an electrical machine which we had on board. Upon his expressing a desire to see it, we sent for it ashore, and shocked him full as much as he chose. While at this place, we were much indebted to Dr. Heberden, the chief physician of the island, and brother to the physician of that name in London. He had for many years been an inhabitant of the Canaries and this island, and had made several observations chiefly philosophical. Some, however, were botanical, describing the trees of the island. Of these he immediately gave us a copy, together with such specimens as he had in his possession, and indeed spared no pains to get for us such living specimens of such as could be procured in flower. We tried here to learn what species of wood it is which has been imported into England, and is now known to cabinet makers by the name of Madeira mahogany, but without much success, as we could not learn that any wood had been exported out of the island by that name. The wood, however, of the tree called here Vigniatico, Laurus indicus, Linn., bids fair to be the thing, it being of a fine grain and brown like mahogany, from which it is difficult to distinguish it, which is well shown at Dr. Heberden's house, where in a bookcase Vigniatico and mahogany were placed close by each other, and were only to be known asunder by the first being not quite so dark coloured as the other. As much of the island as we saw showed evidently the signs of a volcano having some time or other possibly produced the whole, as we saw no one piece of stone which did not evidently show signs of having been burnt, some very much, especially the sand, which was absolutely cinders. Indeed, we did not see much of the country, but we were told that the whole was like the specimen we saw of it. When you first approach it from seaward, it has a very beautiful appearance, the sides of the hills being entirely covered with vineyards, almost as high as the eye can distinguish, which make a constant appearance of verdure, though at this time nothing but the vines remained green, the grass and herbs being entirely burned up, except near the sides of the rills of water by which the vines are watered, and under the shade of the vines themselves, though these very few species of plant were in perfection, the greater part being burnt up. The people here in general seem to be as idle, or rather uninformed a set, as I ever yet saw. all their instruments, even those with which their wine, the only article of trade in the island, is made, are perfectly simple and unimproved. Their method is this: the grapes are put into a square wooden vessel, of dimensions according to the size of the vineyard to which it belongs, into which the servants get, having taken off their stockings and jackets, and with their feet and elbows squeeze out as much of the juice as they can. The stalks, etc., are then collected, tied together with a rope, and put under a square piece of wood, which is pressed down by a lever, to the other end of which is fastened a stone that may be raised up at pleasure by a screw. By this way, and this only, they make their wine, and by this way probably Noah made his, when he had newly planted the first vineyard, after the general destruction of mankind and their arts, though it is not impossible that he might have used a better, if he remembered the ways he had seen used before the flood. It was with great difficulty that some, and not as yet all, of them were persuaded not long ago to graft their vines, and by this mean bring all the fruit of a vineyard to be of one sort, though before the vine which it produced had been spoiled by different sorts of bad ones, which were nevertheless suffered to grow, and taken as much care of as the best, because they added to the quantity of the wine. Yet were they perfectly acquainted with the use of grafting, and constantly practised it on their chestnut trees, by which means they were brought to bear sooner much than they would have done had they been allowed to remain unimproved. Wheel carriages I saw none of in the island of any sort or kind. Indeed, their roads are so intolerably bad that if they had them, they could scarcely make use of them. They have, however, some horses and mules, wonderfully clever in travelling upon them, notwithstanding which they bring to town every drop of wine they make upon men's heads, in vessels made of goat skins. The only imitation of a carriage they have is a board a little hollowed out in the middle, to one end of which a pole is tied by a strap of with leather, the whole machine coming about as near the perfection of a European cart as an Indian canoe does to a boat. With this they move the pipes of wine about the town. Indeed, I suppose they would never have made use even of this, had not the English introduced vessels to put their wine in, which were rather too large to be carried by hand, as they used to do everything else. A speech of their late governor is recorded here, which shows in what light they are looked upon even by the Portuguese, themselves, I believe, far behind all the rest of Europe, except possibly the Spaniards. It was very fortunate, said he, that this island was not Eden, in which Adam and Eve dwelt before the fall, for had it been so, the inhabitants here would never have been induced to put on cloths, so much are they resolved in every particular to follow exactly the paths of their forefathers. Indeed, were the people here only tolerably industrious, there is scarcely any luxury which might not be produced that either Europe or the Indies afford, owing to the great difference of climate observable in ascending the hills. This we experienced in a visit to Dr. Heberden, who lives about 2 miles from the town. We left the thermometer when we set out at 74, and found it there at 66. Indeed, the hills produce almost spontaneously vast plenty of walnuts, chestnuts, and apples, but in the town you find some few plants native of both the Indies, whose flourishing state put it out of all doubt that were they taken any care of, they might have a quantity of them. Of these I mention some: the banana tree, Musa sapientum, Linn., in great abundance; the guava, Psidium pyriferum, Linn., not uncommon; the pine-apple, Bromelia ananas, Linn. Of this I saw some very healthy plants in the providor's garden; mango, Mangifera indica, Linn., one plant also of this in the same garden, bearing fruit every year; cinnamon, Laurus cinnamomum, Linn., very healthy plants of this I saw on the top of Dr. Heberden's house at Fonchiale, which had stood there through the winter without any kind of care having been taken of them. These, without mentioning any more, seem very sufficient to show that the tenderest plants might be cultivated here without any trouble, yet the indolence of the inhabitants is so great that even that is too much for them. Indeed, the policy of the English here is to hinder them as much as possible from growing anything themselves, except what they find their accountant taking in exchange for corn, though the people might, with much less trouble and expense, grow the corn themselves. What corn grows here, which indeed is not much, is of a most excellent quality, large-grained and very fine. Their meat is also very good, mutton, pork, and beef, more especially of which what we had on board the ship was agreed by all of us to be very little inferior to our own, though we Englishmen value ourselves not a little on our peculiar experience in that production. The fat of this was white, like the fat of mutton, yet the meat brown, and coarse-grained as ours, though much smaller. The town of Fonchiali is situated at the bottom of the bay, very ill built, though larger than the size of the island seems to deserve. The houses of the bettermost people are in general large, but those of the poorer sort very small, and the streets very narrow and uncommonly ill-paved. The churches here have abundance of ornaments, chiefly bad pictures, and figures of their favourite saints in laced clothes. The convent of the Franciscans, indeed, which we went to see, had very little ornament, but the neatness with which those fathers kept everything was well worthy of commendation, especially their infirmary, the contrivance of which deserves to be taken particular notice of. It was a long room, on one side of which were windows, and an altar for the convenience of administering the sacrament to the sick. On the other were the wards, each just capable of containing a bed, and lined with white Dutch tiles. To every one of these was a door communicating with a gallery, which ran parallel to the great room, so that any of the sick might be supplied with whatever they wanted, without disturbing their neighbours. In this convent was a curiosity of a very singular nature, a small chapel, whose whole lining, wainscot, and ceiling was entirely composed of human bones, 2 large thigh bones across, and a skull at each of the openings. Among these was a very singular anatomical curiosity, a skull in which one side of the lower jaw was perfectly and very firmly fastened to the upper by an ossification, so that the man, whoever he was, must have lived some time without being able to open his mouth. Indeed, it was plain on the other side that a hole had been made by beating out his teeth, and in some measure damaging his jawbone, by which alone he must have received his nourishment. I must not leave these good fathers without mentioning a thing which does great credit to their civility, and at the same time shows that they are not bigots to their religion. We visited them on Thursday even, just before their supper time. They made many apologies that they could not ask us to sup, not being prepared. But, said they, if you will come tomorrow, notwithstanding it is fast with us, we will have a turkey roasted for you. There are here, besides friaries, 3 or 4 houses of nuns. To one of these, Santa Clara, we went, and indeed the ladies did us the honour to express great pleasure in seeing us there. They had heard that we were great philosophers, and expected much from us. One of the first questions that they asked was, when it would thunder. They then desired to know if we could put them in a way of finding water in their convent, which it seems they were in want of. But notwithstanding, our answers to these questions were not quite so much to the purpose as they expected. They did not at all cease their civilities, for while we stayed, which was about half an hour, I am sure there was not a fraction of a second in which their tongues did not go at an uncommonly nimble rate. It remains now that I should say something of the island in general, and then take my leave of Madeira, till some other opportunity offers of visiting again, for the climate is so fine that any man might wish it was in his power to live here, under the benefits of English laws and liberty. The hills here are very high, much higher than any one would imagine. Pico Ruevo is the highest at 5,068 feet, which is much higher than any land that has been measured in Great Britain. Indeed, as I hinted before, the whole island has probably been the production of a volcano, notwithstanding which its fertility is amazing. All the sides of the hills are covered with vines to a certain height, above which are woods of chestnut and pine of immense extent, and above them forests of wild timber of kinds not known in Europe, which amply supply the inhabitants with whatever they may want. Among these, some there were whose flowers we were not able to procure, and consequently could not settle their genera, particularly those called by the Portuguese mirmulano and pau branco, both which, and especially the first, from the beauty of their leaves, promise to be a great ornament to our European gardens. The inhabitants here are supposed to be about 80,000, and from the town of Fonchiali, its custom house I mean, the King of Portugal receives £20,000 a year, after having paid the governor and all expenses of every kind, which may serve to show in some degree the consequence which this little island is of to the crown of Portugal. Was it in the hands of any other people in the world, its value might easily be doubled, from the excellence of its climate, capable of bearing any kind of crop, a circumstance which the Portuguese do not make the least advantage of. The coin current here is entirely Spanish, for the balance of trade with Lisbon being in disfavour of this island, all the Portuguese money naturally goes there, to prevent which Spanish money is allowed to pass. It is of 3 denominations, pisterins, bits, and half bits, the first worth about 1 shilling, the second 6 pence, and the third 3 pence. They have also Portuguese money of copper, but so scarce that I did not in my stay see a single piece. 1768, September 18, departed Madeira. This evening, everything being ready for sea, we went on board, and at 8 o'clock got under way with a very light breeze. 1768, September 19. Light breezes all day, without any event worth writing about. 1768, September 20. Still almost calm, which gave us an opportunity of taking with the casting net a most beautiful species of medusa, of a colour equalling, if not exceeding, the finest ultramarine. It was described and called Medusa azurea. 1768, September 21. This morn wind foul. Saw, however, some rocks, called in the old charts salvages, which lay to the northward of the Canaries. 1768, September 22. No land in sight this morn. Towards noon almost calm. Many fish were about the ship, but our fishermen could not contrive to catch any of them. 1768, September 23. This morn we were called up very early to see the pike of Teneriffe, which now for the first time appeared at a vast distance, much above the clouds. I mean those which form a bank near the horizon. The hill itself was so faint that no man who was not used to the appearance of land at a great distance could tell it from a cloud. It soon, however, appeared something clearer, and a sketch was made of it. While we were engaged in looking at the hill, the fish was taken, which was described and called scomber serpens. The seamen said they had never seen such a one before, except the first lieutenant, who remembered to have taken one before just about these islands. Signor Hans Sloane, in his passage out to Jamaica, also took one of these fish, which he gives a figure of, vol 1, T1, F2. The pike continued in sight almost all day, though sometimes obscured by the clouds. At sunset, however, its appearance was most truly elegant, the rays of the sun remaining upon it some time after it was set, and the other land quite black, and giving it a warmth of colour not to be expressed by painting. 1768, September 24. This morn the pike appeared very plain and immensely above the clouds, as may well be imagined by its height, which Dr. Heberden of Madeira, who has been himself upon it, communicated to us, 15,396 feet. The doctor also says that though there is no eruption of visible fire from it, yet heat issues from the chinks near the top so strongly that a person who puts his hand upon these is scalded. From him we received, among many other favours, some salt, which he supposes to be the true natron or nitrum of the ancients, and some native sulphur exceedingly pure, both of which he collected himself on top of the mountain, where large quantities, especially of the salt, are found on the surface of the earth. 1768, September 25. Wind continued to blow much as it had done, so we were sure we were well in the trade. Now for the first time we saw plenty of flying fish, whose beauty, especially when seen from the cabin windows, is beyond imagination, their sides shining like burnished silver. When seen from the deck, they do not appear to such advantage, as their backs are then presented to the view, which are dark coloured. 1768, September 26. Went as usual, and as we expected to go these next 2 months. Flying fish are in great plenty about the ship. About 1 today we crossed the tropic. The night was most intolerably hot, the thermometer standing all night at 78 in the cabin, though every window was open. 1768, September 27. About 1 this morn a flying fish was brought into the cabin, the first that had been taken. It flew aboard, I suppose chased by some other fish, or maybe merely because it did not see the ship. At breakfast another was brought, which had flown into Mr. Green, the astronomer's cabin. This whole day we sailed at the rate of 7 knots, sometimes a fathom or 2 more, the wind being rather stronger than it usually is in the trade. 1768, September 28. Wind rather slackened. 3 birds were today about the ship, a swallow, to all appearance the same as our European one, and 2 motacias. About nightfall one of the latter was taken. About 11 a shoal of porpoises came about the ship, and the fizz-gig was soon thrown into one of them, but would not hold. 1768, September 29. This morn calm. Employed in drawing and describing the bird taken yesterday. Called it Motacia avida. While the drawing was in hand, it became very familiar, so much so that we had a brace made for it, in hope to keep it alive. As flies were in amazing abundance on board the ship, we had no fear of plentiful supply of provision. About noon, a young shark was seen from the cabin windows following the ship, who immediately took a bait and was caught on board. He proved to be the Squalus charcharius of Linnaeus, and assisted us in clearing up much confusion which almost all authors had made about that species. With him came on board 4 sucking fish, Echinius remora, Linn., who were preserved in spirit. Notwithstanding it was 12 o'clock before the shark was taken, we made shift to have a part of him stewed for dinner, and very good meat he was, at least in the opinion of Dr. Solander and myself, though some of the seamen did not seem to be fond of him, probably from some prejudice founded on the species sometimes feeding on human flesh. 1768, September 30. This morn at daybreak made the island of Bonavista one of the Cape Verde Islands. Mr. Buchan employed in taking views of the land, Mr. Parkinson busy in finishing the sketches made of the shark yesterday. This evening the other Motacia avida was brought to us. It differed scarce at all from the first taken, except that it was something larger. His head, however, gave us some good by supplying us with near 20 specimens of ticks, which differed little from the Acarus vicinus Linn. It was, however, described and called Motacia. End of section 2, 1768, September.